In 1967, humanity encountered an alien species on Mars for the very first time, and that was also when the First War began. These aliens, whose goal was to wipe out humankind, were called the Betha. In response, humans began developing weapons to fight back. The first major battle took place on the Moon, where humanity deployed combat robots and heavy artillery against the Betha. Despite their efforts, they still couldn't stop the invasion. By 1973, human technology had advanced significantly, and the fight against the Betha continued. The aliens showed no mercy, relentlessly attacking humanity and attempting to take over Earth. Then, in 1997, in the imperial capital of Japan, Kyoto, a new chapter of the struggle against the Betha began. That day, 3 students named Aki, Izumi, and Shimeko were standing on a bridge, watching the river flow beneath them. They noticed one of their friends, Yudi, walking toward them while reading a school textbook. The 3 of them waved and called out to her. Yui smiled and walked over to greet them. A moment later, 2 combat robots flew above them, creating a strong gust of wind that nearly lifted their skirts. Yui told her friends that those were tactical surface fighters, combat robots they would one day use after graduation. The specific model was the Type 82 Zukaku, a machine developed by Yui's father. Yui and her friends attended a training academy for the Capital Defense Forces. That morning in class, their teacher explained that soldiers in their first battle against the Betha could usually last only 8 minutes. If they managed to survive beyond that, it would mark the first step toward becoming skilled pilots. While the teacher was explaining, Yui's friends were chatting among themselves. Izumi looked especially tired since she had stayed up late talking on the phone with her boyfriend. Her boyfriend had recently been transferred to Kyushu. Shimeko pointed out that everyone in Kyushu had been evacuated a year ago, but Izumi said he mentioned something about a new base being built there. Yui tried to remind them to stay focused, but before she could say anything, their teacher suddenly called them out. Yui quickly stood up straight. The teacher then asked Yui to explain what the Betha were. With confidence, she answered that the Betha were alien beings intent on destroying humanity. Suddenly, another girl, Kazusa, stood up and added that the Betha were extraterrestrial creatures not from Earth, whose purpose was to annihilate humankind. Yui and Kazusa locked eyes for a brief moment before the teacher told them both to sit down and continue the lesson. During lunch breaks, several students were seen working on assembling training robots. Meanwhile, Yui and her friends were chatting outside the classroom. They started talking about Kazusa, discussing how her family had a long history of serving as tactical surface fighter pilots rather than as royal officials. Some of Yui's friends joked that Kazusa might be Yui's rival. Yui denied it, saying she didn't see Kazusa that way. As they sat down to eat lunch together, Izumi began reading a letter from her boyfriend, but Aki couldn't resist teasing her a little. Everyone laughed, lightening the mood. One day in autumn, Shimeko and Yui were riding a bus together. Shimeko asked if Yui's father was still overseas. Yui replied that he often traveled back and forth, but even when he returned to Japan, he was always busy in Tokyo. Not long after, they saw a car pass by, an expensive one that happened to be carrying Kazusa. Seeing that, Shimeko sighed and said that families of high status should be setting better examples for ordinary citizens. Yui laughed, saying Shimeko sounded just like their teacher. When Yui finally arrived home, her face lit up with excitement. She saw several cars parked along the street near her house. Her uncle, Lieutenant Colonel Eiji, had come to visit. Yui immediately greeted him with a salute. Eiji was surprised to see how much she had grown and how capable she had become. He asked her to keep his visit a secret since his new posting hadn't been made official yet. He told her to just call him Uncle as usual. Eiji was curious how Yui had known he was there, and she explained that she noticed the security vehicles parked nearby. Eiji chuckled in disbelief, mentioning that he had specifically declined an escort. Yui laughed softly at his reaction. They sat down for tea, and Eiji shared a message from Yui's father. He wanted Yui to keep working hard in her training. Her father couldn't leave Ichigaya for the time being. Yui said she had already guessed as much and asked if it was due to an emergency situation, but Eiji didn't know the details. Yui was scheduled to begin her live training soon. Eiji explained that at the National Defense Training School, the students would practice using the Gekishin units, and once they graduated, they would be allowed to pilot the Zukaku. Both Gekishin and Zukaku were impressive tactical robots, but they still hadn't succeeded in defeating the Betha. It seemed they would need far more tactical surface fighters to handle situations like that. After hearing this, Yui asked for a chance to try one out herself. However, Eiji reminded her that while the country's defense was important, the idea of sending young girls to the front lines hadn't been considered yet, so she shouldn't rush things. Yui then asked how long Eiji planned to stay in Kyoto. Eiji told her he would return to Tokyo as soon as his work in Kyoto was finished. Eiji mentioned that he regretted missing out on Yui's mother's home-cooked meat dishes, and Yui innocently offered to cook for him next time. Eiji laughed softly and patted Yui's head before gazing up at the beautiful evening sky over Kyoto. That night, Eiji and his colleagues visited the Kubun residence to meet Yui. Yui asked why, out of all 5 noble families, Eiji chose to visit the Kubun family. Eiji said he wanted to show her something, then handed her a file containing information about a new weapon. Yui expressed her hope that this new weapon could finally bring an end to the war, and Eiji shared that same hope. The next day, Yui and her friends were in the changing room putting on their pilot suits. The suits were tight and form-fitting, which made Aki blush and say they felt a little embarrassing. Shimeko teased Amamiya, saying that a kid like her should be shy about something like that. Meanwhile, Kazusa kept staring at Yui. It was clear she really wanted to beat her. The students climbed into their tactical surface fighters and prepared their protective gear and weapons. Yui and her friends began activating their machines. Once ready, they launched into the air. Their instructor reminded them to stay as close to the ground as possible. Aki, however, flew her unit too high and triggered a height warning before colliding with a laser beam. After that, the instructor told them to switch to ground formation and engage mock enemies. The machines moved carefully, avoiding contact whenever possible, but an accidental collision occurred. The instructor declared that everyone had failed and ordered them to return to base, giving them a punishment of 10 laps around the field. Yui and her friends carried out the laps as instructed, then resumed their training. This time, they had to hold their positions and fire at targets ahead. The instructor urged them to keep fighting, reminding them that in real combat, those who gave up first would be the first to fall. During a training match, Kazusa faced off against Yui. Kazusa managed to push Yui back, and just as she was about to finish her attack, Yui countered and struck back, damaging part of Kazusa's unit. Yui then landed a clean hit on Kazusa's robot's shoulder, securing her victory. During the break, Kazusa was rinsing her hair when Yui approached and handed her a towel. Kazusa smiled and accepted it. That evening, Kazusa joined Yui and the others for a snack run. The group was cheerful and welcoming, making Kazusa feel like part of their circle. Later that night, when they tried sneaking back into the school, they were caught by their instructor. As punishment, they were assigned to clean the tactical surface fighters used in training. One autumn night, a robot unexpectedly malfunctioned and exploded. Emergency crews rushed to evacuate the injured, while several students watched in shock. The instructor told them that if they couldn't handle witnessing something like that, they might not be ready to be there at all. After the incident, a few students decided to withdraw from the program and said their goodbyes. By 1998, war had broken out between humans and the Betha on the Korean peninsula. Civilians could only watch from afar as the battles raged on. At the same time, Eiji, who was stationed at the Ichigaya Weapons and Technology Defense Center, received reports about the situation. He realized that the fortresses were eventually being overrun, and it was only a matter of time before Japan would come under attack. That night, a fleet led by Captain Izumo with Emiya among its ranks prepared to head toward the battlefield. The first officer reported that the Betha had entered the Tsushima Strait from the southern part of the Korean peninsula and that more were on their way. Captain Izumo knew their fleet wouldn't be able to hold off such a massive assault, especially since some allied ships were caught in a storm. Even so, he ordered his crew not to let the Betha reach the mainland, because if they did, tens of thousands of people would lose their lives. In July, lines of tanks fired their cannons toward the sea, trying to stop the Betha from reaching the mainland. The cannons kept firing non-stop, but the Betha continued to push forward toward land. Their attacks had already started spreading across Kyushu. That day, Izumi suddenly screamed in shock, and her friends immediately gathered around her. Kazusa came over and asked what was happening to Izumi. It turned out that Izumi's boyfriend, who had been transferred to Kyushu, had fallen in battle. Even Shimeko's cousin, who lived in Tottori, had died because he couldn't evacuate in time. Yui tried her best to comfort Izumi, who was crying uncontrollably. Meanwhile, the news broadcast reported that Betha forces from northern Kyushu and the Sanin region on the western side of Honshu were approaching the mainland. Japanese and American troops stationed in Japan were planning to join forces and form a defensive line connecting Maizuru and Kobe to protect the capital. Evacuation orders had already been issued across several regions. Only then did Yui and her friends realize that the reason their training had been accelerated was so they could soon be deployed to help. Several areas were in the process of evacuation, including Osaka, Shiga, Nara, Wakayama, Mie, and Aichi. During one of these evacuations, an elderly man suddenly decided to return to Kyoto. He believed that if the capital fell, there would be no point in fleeing to Tokyo. His family tried to stop him, but he insisted on going back to Kyoto. At the same time, the cadets at the pilot training dormitory strengthened their resolve to fight. Yui practiced with determination, Izumi couldn't stop thinking about her late boyfriend, and Kazusa seemed fired up to destroy the Betha. When the day of departure finally arrived, Yui said goodbye to her mother and family. They were deeply moved as they watched her leave. Yui's mother expressed how proud she was that her daughter was dedicating herself to serve the nation and its people. Before leaving, Yui saluted her mother with respect and gratitude. By July 31, the final line of defense in Kyoto had completely collapsed. The 27th Recon Unit had encountered the 3rd Betha wave just 6 kilometers west of Azuru. The D-21 and A-19 Recon units had been shot down by laser attacks. At the same time, intense battles were taking place around Fukuchiyama. Because Yui and her team were still in training and lacked combat experience, their mission was to guard the Arashiyama base in Kyoto. They weren't allowed on the front lines since sending them there would only burden the other troops. Their most important duty was to protect the base at all costs. Although they understood that the decision made sense, being labeled as a burden still stung. Izumi especially couldn't let go of her desire to avenge her boyfriend's death. Suddenly, Kazusa rushed in and reported that the Betha had broken through the defensive line and were advancing toward Takagame, not far from their base. The group ran outside to see the battle for themselves. Sure enough, it looked like the defense troops were starting to get overwhelmed. When one of the mechs approached the base to resupply, it was suddenly hit by a laser strike and exploded. Yui and the others were stunned by what they saw. Yui couldn't help but think that the world might truly be heading toward collapse. It had been a long time since any country had even been able to count the number of casualties anymore. Then, a sudden emergency alert blared across the comms. Betha had been detected just 10 kilometers west of the base. Yui and her team immediately rushed to their tactical surface fighters. Shimeko was puzzled, wondering why the Betha had advanced so quickly and were now targeting the ammunition depot behind the front line. But Yui disagreed, saying that they were now the ones standing on the front line. The team activated their machines and began moving forward. Reports came in saying that more Betha were arriving in massive numbers. The leading force consisted of destroyer-class units, followed by grappler-class with the laser-class positioned in the rear. Yui hoped that she and her friends would make it through the battle safely. With determination in their hearts, they took off, flying straight toward the incoming assault. During the battle against the Betha, the squad leader ordered Yui to take command of the 2nd Tactical Surface Fighter Unit, which would focus on attacking the destroyer-class enemies. Meanwhile, the 1st unit, under the squad leader's direct control, was tasked with protecting the 3rd unit, which would concentrate on engaging the grappler class. The leader reminded everyone that if they saw any laser fire in the sky, they had to prioritize eliminating the laser-class enemies first. Yui and her teammates stood ready on the front line, waiting for the destroyer class to appear. Soon, Yui signaled that the enemy was approaching. The squad leader instructed her team to lure the Betha as close as possible and to stay below 100 meters in altitude. As the Betha forces closed in, the squad leader ordered a shift to the Arrowhead 1 attack formation. All tactical surface fighters advanced, preparing to fire in unison. Shimeko appeared nervous and began firing repeatedly at the Betha. Yui quickly reminded her to recall their training on how to deal with the destroyer class. Following Yui's command, the team ascended and opened fire from above. After successfully hitting several targets, Shimeko managed to destroy a few destroyer-class units and smiled with relief, proud of what she had accomplished. Suddenly, a warning flashed. A laser-class enemy had appeared nearby. Yui noticed Shimeko had flown past the safe altitude limit and tried to warn her. Shimeko realized it too late. A laser beam struck her unit, causing it to explode. Izumi was shocked, and Aiki cried out her name in horror. The squad leader told everyone not to panic, explaining that if they stayed close to the other Betha, the laser class would be less likely to target them. Kazusa then asked where the laser class was hiding. The squad leader responded that it was positioned at 2 o'clock, about 1,200 meters away, near the transmitter station. Kazusa quickly located the target, locked on, and prepared to fire. But before she could take the shot, she heard Izumi's desperate voice. She was under attack. Kazusa immediately redirected her aim and fired to protect Izumi. Betha forces kept coming in waves. Aiki was also firing but soon ran out of ammunition. Just as Betha was about to overpower her, Yui rushed in and took it down just in time. The squad leader urged everyone to stay focused on their assigned targets and reminded them not to let the enemy reach the 3rd unit. The team continued to fire at the incoming Betha. Aiki drew her sword and slashed through several enemies. She felt a surge of relief, telling Yui that she had surpassed her 8-minute survival mark. But before Yui could respond, another Betha lunged at Aiki, destroying her unit in a fiery explosion. Yui was devastated by Aiki's death. Despite their losses, Yui and her teammates managed to destroy the laser-class enemies. The Betha force was temporarily pushed back, but soon another wave began approaching their position. The squad leader was confused. There was only supposed to be one enemy group. He tried to contact command for confirmation, but there was no response. Realizing something was wrong, he suspected that the main force might have been wiped out. Repeated attempts to reach headquarters went unanswered, and soon it became clear the Arashiyama weapons base had fallen to the Betha. Meanwhile, the Yawata defense line was still holding its ground, but the soldiers were heavily outnumbered. Even their captain's unit was destroyed in battle. Despite their efforts, the Betha eventually broke through the Yawata line. At that moment, Eiji was still at the Ichigaya command post. He hadn't realized the defeat was this severe. He asked his aide about the American forces, and the report came back that U.S. troops had deployed tactical surface fighters from the Theodore Roosevelt carrier through the Biwa Canal to support Japan's defense. Eiji was surprised by their sense of duty, though he doubted it would change the tide of battle. He thought the defenders might soon have to make some very difficult decisions. Above all, Eiji silently hoped that UB would survive the fight. Meanwhile, at Lake Biwa, the 2nd Naval Combat Boat Fleet, Owari, was preparing for battle. The admiral ordered his troops to ready their main weapons. At that moment, Yui and her team were still firing at the incoming Betha forces. One of the creatures leaped toward Yui, but she reacted quickly, pushing it back, stomping it down, and finishing it with a shot. Their situation grew worse as the number of Betha increased rapidly surrounding their position. Their ammunition began running low, and some had already run out. The squad leader realized their position was no longer strategic and ordered all units to retreat to Line 8. Yui's teammates started taking off, but she noticed that Izumi was still fighting, swinging her sword fiercely at the Betha. Yui called out, urging her to fall back, but Izumi refused. She wanted revenge for what she had lost. It wasn't until Yui mentioned Imiena's name and referred to her as a fellow pilot that Izumi finally followed orders and retreated with the others. The squad leader shouted for Yui's team to move faster as the Betha continued to chase them. Suddenly, a laser attack warning appeared. The squad leader told everyone to stay calm and keep their altitude low to avoid being hit. But then, in an instant, he was struck by a laser and went down. Izumi was shocked, wondering how that was possible since he had been flying so low. Kazusa suspected that the enemy had expanded their laser firing angle. The Betha kept closing in. The nearest safe zone was across the hill, about 120 seconds away. One by one, their teammates were shot down by laser fire. Izumi yelled for Yui to do something, while Kazusa begged her to take command so they wouldn't all die there. Yui immediately took over, ordering everyone to push their engines to the limit and fly as close to the ground as possible. They released anti-laser smoke, but the beams cut right through it, striking another member of the squad. Izumi shouted that it was useless, but Yui insisted that they couldn't give up. They kept flying low, but now only 3 of them were left. The timer showed 60 seconds. Then, out of nowhere, massive explosions erupted. It was naval artillery fire, targeting the advancing Betha forces. The admiral declared that a soldier's duty was to complete the mission, and that he alone would bear the responsibility for what came next. The bombardment wiped out the Betha that had begun invading the city and nearby residential areas. In the city, monks prayed for the safety of everyone still fighting. The civilians could only watch helplessly as their ancient capital, over 1,200 years old, was destroyed. Mecha units continued firing relentlessly to hold back the Betha. Yui tried contacting the command post, but their ammunition was completely spent. Izumi suddenly remembered something from school, how Betha were said to consume human bodies. The thought terrified her, convinced that they might soon share that fate. Yui told her to hang on, reminding her that the 3 of them had already survived past the 8-minute death limit. Izumi whispered her wish to someday avenge her boyfriend and her fallen friends. Yui reassured her that they could keep fighting, together with the rest of the forces still holding the line. Then Kazusa noticed something on the motion sensors. They scanned the area but saw nothing. Without warning, a Betha burst out from a nearby building and lunged straight at Yui. The creature pinned her mecha to the ground, trapping her underneath. Kazusa wanted to shoot but couldn't risk hitting Yui at such a close range. Yui shouted for Izumi to fire. A moment later, the Betha exploded into pieces. It turned out that Izumi hadn't fired, the shot came from elsewhere. A Type 94 Shiranui Unit 1C landed right in front of them. The pilot was their instructor. He told them that surviving past the 8-minute mark proved they were becoming real pilots. From now on, he said they should address him as captain, because they were no longer just trainees, they were in a real battlefield. He promised to protect them and ordered them to head to Kyoto Station at Line 8, where they could regroup and restock ammunition. The 3 were reluctant to leave him behind, but he firmly insisted that they follow orders. Yui, Izumi, and Kazusa then took off toward Kyoto Station. Watching them go, the instructor hoped that one day he would see them again, as true, fully fledged pilots. As the Betha swarmed closer, he raised his weapon and opened fire, determined to hold them back no matter what. While Yui was flying, she occasionally glanced back to check on her instructor, who was struggling behind her. She wanted to help, but she couldn't. she had to keep moving forward. Yui contacted the command post to report that she and her teammates, the 2nd Arashiyama unit, would be entering from the west. Unfortunately, during their flight, a group of Fort-class Betha appeared and blocked their path, forcing the 3 of them to crash. Yui's tactical surface fighter was too damaged to operate any further, so she quickly got out and tried to contact Kazusa and Izumi. There was no response. Determined to find them, Yui kept moving through the wreckage until she found Izumi's TSF. But Izumi wasn't there, only a small photograph of her and her boyfriend remained inside. Yui pressed on, searching the area near the fallen unit. There were traces of blood everywhere, and when she followed them, she froze in horror. She saw Izumi's lifeless body being consumed by several soldier-class Betha. Yui immediately turned off her flashlight and tried to stay silent. Suddenly, Kazusa's voice came through the comms. Yui asked where she was and began heading toward her location. At that moment, Kazusa's TSF was surrounded by Betha, tearing apart its armor piece by piece. Inside, Kazusa was in pain, struggling to stay conscious while calling out to Yui. Desperation filled her voice as she begged Yui to end her suffering before the Betha reached her. Yui finally found Kazusa's unit, still being swarmed by the creatures. With trembling hands, Yui aimed her pistol at the Betha, ready to fire, but when Kazusa pleaded for her to shoot, Yui couldn't bring herself to do it. She screamed in anguish and pulled the trigger several times into the air, unable to point the weapon at her friend. Powerless, Yui fell to her knees, forced to watch as Kazusa was dragged away and killed. Just as the Betha turned toward Yui, a powerful blast hit the creatures, throwing her backward. A Take Mikazuchi Type TSF had arrived, its sword drawn as it descended. The unit landed with incredible force, slashing through the swarm and firing rounds that obliterated the remaining Betha nearby. Then everything went dark for Yui. When she woke up, she found herself in the student infirmary. Her body was weak, but she managed to step outside, only to be met with a sight that broke her heart. Kyoto had fallen. The city was nothing but ruins, completely overrun by the Betha. The world seemed to be ending, and human casualties had become impossible to count. Yui couldn't help but wonder if humanity was nearing total collapse. A nurse noticed Yui wandering outside and quickly called out to her, reminding her that she wasn't in any condition to walk around. The nurse gently brought her back inside. As they entered, the sound of a crying baby echoed through the room. Yui began to cry as well, prompting the nurse to ask if she was in pain. 3 years later, Yui was on a transport aircraft, staring out the window. She had made herself a promise, never to cry again. On the day she was rescued and treated at the infirmary, she swore she would never allow the world to fall into ruin ever again. One day, the robot piloted by Teresa was being targeted by the one controlled by Kriska and Inia. Teresa was caught off guard when Kriska managed to lock onto her position. She quickly took off, trying her best to evade the pursuit. Kriska seemed to enjoy it, hoping to see the colors of Teresa's desperation unfold. That same day, on May 2, 2001, a transport plane was flying over Alaska, carrying 2 American soldiers, Yuya and Vincent. Vincent pointed out the Yukon River to Yuya and asked what kind of challenges the spirit of Alaska might have in store for them. Looking rather uninterested, Yuya replied that all he planned to do was eat salmon roe and sleep. Vincent couldn't believe his attitude. He reminded Yuya that they were representatives of the United States and should make their country proud. Yuya, however, dryly commented that it felt more like they had been demoted. Vincent mentioned that the Yukon base was home to tactical surface fighters from all around the world. Hearing that, Yuya recalled the days when he used to fight alongside his friends. Not long after, their plane began its landing approach, but suddenly, an alarm blared, signaling danger. Meanwhile, the battle between Teresa and Kriska continued. Teresa grew frustrated, wondering why she couldn't shake Kriska off her tail. A warning message came through ordering her to return to base. She ignored it, believing that if she stopped now, Kriska and Inia would surely defeat her. Back on the plane, Yuya rushed into the control room to find out what was happening. He learned that 2 tactical surface fighters had entered the training zone and were now flying dangerously close behind the aircraft. The pilot was confused about why they were maneuvering that way and began to panic as the situation grew more dangerous. Seeing the pilot's hesitation, Yuya firmly told him to stay calm and keep the plane steady. At that moment, Teresa fired at Kriska. Yuya took over the controls and instructed the pilot not to climb, insisting that they maintain a straight path to the runway. The 2 mecha continued their high-speed chase near the plane. Soon, Kriska locked onto Teresa's position again, which surprised her. Kriska felt a strange sense of satisfaction, knowing she had made Teresa nervous. When the plane finally touched down safely, the pilot sighed in relief, saying Yuya was definitely suited for the Yukon base. Teresa, however, was furious, frustrated that she couldn't outmaneuver Kriska. Kriska asked her command unit for permission to eliminate her target, but Enia quickly urged her not to take things too far. Despite that, Kriska fired another round from above, forcing Teresa's unit to crash. Yuya and Vincent hurried over to the crash site to make sure the pilot was safe. Yuya reached out a hand to help, but Teresa, still angry and embarrassed, refused and shouted in frustration toward Kriska. Meanwhile, Kriska reported to the command post that the opposing pilot had survived. She then flew back toward the base. Enia admitted that she was scared, worrying that Teresa might be seriously hurt. Kriska reassured her, saying that Teresa was fine and she had confirmed it herself. Enia asked whether their own tactical surface fighters, or even they themselves, might end up destroyed someday. Kriska confidently told her not to worry, promising that she would protect her. Enia smiled, feeling relieved and trusting Kriska completely. At the same time, Teresa, Yuya, and Vincent were being escorted to their dormitory. Vincent was amazed by the number of tactical surface fighters stationed there. He guessed that the base was truly serious about gathering top pilots and machines from around the world. With that kind of collaboration, he believed humanity would finally stand a chance against the Betha. The project, known as Prominence, was an international initiative to develop the next generation of tactical surface fighter technology. The United Nations had designated the Yukon base as a central hub for foreign military units that had lost their home countries, allowing them to continue research and development. The ultimate goal was to bring together test pilots and prototype mecha from every nation, creating a bridge for shared knowledge and technology in the advancement of tactical surface fighters. Teresa rolled her eyes at Vincent's excitement, teasing him for acting like he had never seen a tactical surface fighter before. She asked where he came from, and Vincent proudly said he was from Groom Lake, Nevada, home to one of America's biggest research facilities. Noticing the pilot insignias on Yuya's and Vincent's uniforms, Teresa asked if they were both pilots. Yuya confirmed it. Vincent then told Teresa she should thank Yuya, since without him, her crash might have been far worse. Yuya, however, said that Teresa had handled it herself. Curious, he then asked what kind of pilots the Terminator team were, but Teresa admitted she didn't know much about them either. Meanwhile, Yui was walking alone, feeling lost in the unfamiliar place she had just arrived at. Suddenly, Enia appeared and asked if Yui had lost her way. Enia then kindly showed her the right direction. Yui smiled, feeling a bit embarrassed for getting lost there. Enia was sure that Yui had just arrived, since the look and color of her uniform made it obvious to her. Not long after, Kriska showed up, and Enia immediately ran over to greet her. Yui finally reached the 3rd Allied Forces base, the Yukon Operations Command Center. That day, she was accompanied by Ibrahim as they headed toward a meeting room. Ibrahim introduced the members of their new team. 2nd Lieutenant Yuya, a skilled pilot from the U.S. Tactical Military School, 2nd Lieutenant Stella from Sweden, 2nd Lieutenant Vincent from Italy, 2nd Lieutenant Teresa from Nepal, and Lieutenant Yui herself, representing the Japanese Imperial Forces. Ibrahim, who came from Turkey, held the rank of lieutenant and served as the captain of the Argos unit. Ibrahim explained that their team would be participating in the development of the XFJ project. Suddenly, a man walked in and said that the XFJ project was a joint development effort by the Boeing Corporation based on Japan's Type 94 tactical robot model. Ibrahim introduced the man as Frank, a technical advisor from Boeing. He then explained that the purpose of the day's training was for all XFJ project members to get to know each other better. Valerio asked if they were going to infiltrate Lilfort, but Ibrahim denied it. Instead, he said they would take on something more challenging, Case 47, which involved a region filled with laser-class Betha units. Yuya quietly looked around at his teammates and realized that Italy, Sweden, and Japan were all countries that had lost territory to the Betha. He began to think that this project wasn't simply about cooperation between the US and Japan. Ibrahim then divided them into teams. Team A consisted of Valerio and Teresa, while Team B included Stella and Yuya. Yuya was assigned to take the captain's tactical robot for the mission. Teresa immediately questioned why Yuya was using the captain's unit. Ibrahim explained that Yuya was the lead pilot for the XFG project. Teresa didn't seem to take it well and questioned why Yuya was chosen as the main pilot. Ibrahim simply told everyone to prepare their tactical robots by 1325.